Hi, welcome to Parrot and Wolf. Today we're going to talk about the verb used to in English. Now, used to is a very useful verb and can have very different meanings depending on the form we use. So, how many forms are there? Well, we can use used to talk about past habits and repeated actions, past states, and familiarity. A habit is something we do often, or more precisely, the same action we repeat regularly. Most people have lots of different habits in their daily lives, some good, some bad, because they form routine behavior or things we do often. We can also use used to talk about actions and states that we're familiar with or accustomed to. These are often actions that we found difficult in the past but now are much easier, so they've become familiar. So let's look at past habits and repeated actions in detail first. I walked to work. This is a simple sentence that describes going to work. It's in the past simple tense, so it's a single past action. Now look at this. I used to walk to work. This sentence also describes going to work, but the big difference is it repeated. It happened more than once, and also after it repeated for some time, it stopped. So we use used to describe past repeated actions that we don't do now. So let's think. Is the action in the past? Yes. Did the action happen more than once? Yes. So was it a habit? Yes. Do we do it now? No. So we use used to describe the action. We don't know when we stopped a habit. It could be last month, last year, 10 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago, or even in the distant past. But the important thing is we regularly repeated the action for some time and then stopped, which makes it a past habit. Okay, now that's actions. What about past states? Milk used to be cheaper. This sentence describes a state, the cost of milk, using the verb be. Now we use used to show the milk was cheap for a period of time in the past, but it's now more expensive. So you might be thinking, well, why not just use past simple instead of used to? Why not just say milk was cheaper? Good question. And the answer is we use used to describe an action or state that will not exist again. In the example above, milk will never be as cheap again in the future. This is an implied meaning, and it's the difference between past simple and used to. Some other examples are, I didn't used to eat ice cream. Her brother used to be fat. The trains used to run on time. Did she used to smoke? I used to have hair. Notice that the form of used to changes slightly in negative sentences and questions, but don't worry, it's easy to use and we'll see it later in the video. When talking about past habits, we can use an alternative to used to. Can you guess what it is? Well, instead of used to, we can use would. Have a look at this. I would walk to work. This sentence has exactly the same meaning as I used to walk to work. There's no difference. This is because it's an action. When we talk about past habits and repeated actions, we can choose used to or would. It's completely up to you. But be careful. When we talk about past states, we cannot use would. It doesn't work. We can only use used to. Let's think. Is it an action or a state? An action. Used to or would? Both is fine. Is it an action or a state? A state. Used to or would? Only used to. You can't use would. It's important to remember we can only use would to describe past habitual actions, not states. Got it? When you're describing past habits and states in conversation and you're unsure which form to use, you can always use used to. You know it works, it's safe. Okay? However, native speakers often use both forms to avoid repeating themselves and to make the conversation more interesting. So try to be comfortable with both forms. Okay, so lastly, we have familiarity. We can use to be used to and to get used to talk about familiarity. So let's look at to be used to first. I am used to eating chili. This sentence shows the action is familiar to the speaker, or more specifically, they've learned to be comfortable with the action over time. The speaker wasn't familiar with or comfortable with eating chili in the past, but through repeating the action, they are familiar with eating chili now. Perhaps in the past the speaker didn't like chili, but they had to eat it and now they like it. So they've learned to like it over time. Remember, the verb to be shows a state, not an action. So the emphasis is on the result of the action, not the action in progress. Let's think. Has the action always been familiar? No. Was the action familiar in the past? No. Was the action practiced and repeated? Yes. Is the action familiar now as a result? Yes. And is the emphasis on the action or the result? The result. Remember, they don't describe ability, they only describe something you are familiar with or comfortable with. Some other examples are, Emma is used to waking up at 6 a.m. He must be used to the cold weather by now. I am not used to driving at night. So, we use to be used to show something we weren't familiar with or comfortable with, but now as a result of repetition, we are. So, what about to get used to? I got used to eating new things. This sentence also shows familiarity, but now the emphasis is on the action in progress, not the result. The difference between to be used to and to get used to is exactly the same as the difference between be and become. Look at this example. I am good at football. I became good at football. Be focuses on the state right now, or the result of practice. Become focuses on the progress of the action to achieve the result. These two sentences can be combined to give, I wasn't good at football, but I played a lot and over time I became good at football. Now I am good at football. To be used to and to get used to work in exactly the same way. I wasn't used to eating chili, but I ate it a lot and over time I got used to eating chili. Now I am used to eating chili. We use to be used to and to get used to describe things we are familiar and comfortable with. But remember, they don't describe ability. They only describe something you are familiar with or comfortable with. Some other examples are, I'm getting used to driving on the left. I'll never get used to the time difference between China and England. Politicians are used to lying to the public. Now, how do we form sentences with used to? Well, it's fairly simple. Let's have a look. When talking about past habits and repeated past actions and states, we can use used to plus the bare infinitive. The good news is the form stays the same for every subject. Great. In the sentence, I used to eat breakfast, I is the subject, used to shows the past habit, eat is the bare infinitive form of to eat, and breakfast is the object. However, in question and negative sentences, there is a slightly different form. Did you used to walk to work? No, I didn't used to walk to work. Notice there is no letter D in this form. Some other examples are, she used to eat breakfast at 6 a.m. Who used to go to the cinema when they were young? I didn't used to smoke before I started acting. They used to do karaoke all night. In addition, when talking about past habits and repeated past actions, but not states, we can use would plus the bare infinitive. Again, the good news is the form stays the same for every subject. So in the sentence, I would eat breakfast, I is the subject, would shows the past habit, eat is the bare infinitive form of to eat, and breakfast is the object. Some other examples are, he would eat breakfast at 6 a.m, you would eat breakfast at 6 a.m, we would eat breakfast at 6 a.m. But remember, we can't use would to talk about past states. It's not possible and it just doesn't work. And lastly, for familiarity, we use be used to and get used to. But be careful with these because the forms of be and get change with the subject. Let's have a look. So, in the sentence, I am used to eating chili, I is the subject, am is the present verb form of be, used to shows familiarity, eating is the ing form of to eat, and chili is the object. Notice the verb form following used to is the ing form, the ing form. This is the big difference between past habit and familiarity. Past habit uses bare infinitive and familiarity uses the ing form, so it can be easily recognizable. It's a good idea to pay attention to this when listening. If it's used to eat, it's past habit. If it's used to eating, it's familiarity. Got it? Now, for to get used to in the sentence, I got used to eating chili, I is the subject, got is the past form of get, used to shows familiarity, eating is the ing form of to eat, and chili is the object. Again, the form of get changes with the subject and the tense. So, a last note on English pronunciation, we always contract the verb forms. For example, I would walk to work becomes I'd walk to work, and I am getting used to living in London becomes I'm getting used to living in London. These contractions are common when speaking and writing, but of course informal when writing. So, to summarize, used to can describe past habits, repeated past actions and states, and familiarity. We use a different verb form for each different meaning, and remember to always contract your verb forms. To find out more about learning English for Cambridge and IELTS exams, business and work, or general conversation, visit ParrotandWolf.com.